Let's start today with something we usually take for granted, our own brains.
Right.
We generally know how we learn a first language. We're babies. We just sort of soak it up like sponges.
Yeah.
And we have a pretty good idea of what happens when we learn a second one in school.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the fundamental question for today. What actually happens when we learn a third?
It sounds like it should be a simple math problem, doesn't it? Just add one more. 1 + 1 + 1.
Exactly. Is it just learning a second language?
Yeah.
Again, rinse and repeat? Or is that jump from 2 to 3 a completely different ballgame?
It turns out it is a completely different ballgame. And that distinction between the second language, or L2, and the third, L3, that's where the science of the mind gets, well, incredibly messy.
And incredibly fascinating.
Oh, absolutely.
So to crack this open, we are diving deep into a really heavy-hitting piece of research today. We're looking at theoretical paradigms in sequential multilingualism.
This is a key chapter from the book Third Language Acquisition and Linguistic Transfer by Rothman and his colleagues.
And our mission for this deep dive is to shatter a very specific myth.
Right. We need to move you away from the idea that the brain has these separate little boxes for separate languages. Box A for English, box B for Spanish.
Like a tiny little filing cabinet inside your skull.
Exactly. That just doesn't exist. We're going to look at the reality, which is dynamic, it's competitive, and honestly, it's a bit chaotic.
So languages in the brain are actually fighting for resources.
They're fighting for resources, they overlap, they shape one another. It's not a filing cabinet, it's more like a bustling ecosystem.
Okay, so to keep us from getting lost in that chaos, we've structured this into 3 specific lenses. First, the cognitive lens. Do we have some kind of biological blueprint for grammar?
Then the dynamic lens, how do languages survive and even decay in the mind?
And finally, the social lens, because as we're going to see, sometimes what counts as a language is really a political decision, not a linguistic one.
That covers the roadmap. So let's get into the machinery.
Okay, so lens 1, the cognitive machinery. In linguistics, it seems like there's this massive heavyweight fight between 2 camps on how we get language into our heads. In the red corner, we have the generative approach.
This is the view that comes out of the Chomsky tradition. The core argument is that humans are born with a genetically endowed blueprint.
We call that universal grammar, or UG.
Exactly, universal grammar. The idea is that you, as a human being, have a specific biological guide to language learning that's pre-installed.
It's hardware, not software.
Precisely. And probably the strongest evidence for this is something they call the poverty of the stimulus.
Which sounds like an economic problem, maybe a lack of coffee, but it's not.
No, it's a data problem. Just think about a toddler. The language they hear, the input, it's messy.
Full of ums and ahs, interruptions.
Half-finished sentences, it's scarce. And yet, somehow, every cognitively neurotypical child ends up with this perfectly complex, rule-bound grammatical system.
So the argument is, you know more than you've actually heard.
You know way more than you've heard. I mean, if we relied only on the audio we get from our parents, we'd be guessing at the rules forever. So the generative camp says there must be some innate, domain-specific knowledge.
A language faculty.
A language faculty that limits our guessing.
It limits the hypothesis space.
Yeah.
I love that concept. It's like having a cheat sheet that says, okay, human languages can do X, but they can never do Y.
Right, so your brain doesn't waste time trying to learn Y.
And at the center of this is a concept called merge.
Right. The minimalist program suggests that all of syntax, the whole structure of sentences, is driven by this one single operation. Merge takes 2 objects, say, the word eat and the word apple.
And combines them into a set. Eat, apple.
Simple. But if you repeat that process, you build the hierarchical structure of every sentence in every human language. Okay. You can take eat, apple, and merge it with I.
Now you have I. Eat apple.
It's the building block of all complexity.
Okay, so if we accept this view that we have a blueprint and this merge tool, why does the source material say learning a third language is so special? Why isn't it just the blueprint running its program again?
Because of transfer. In second language acquisition, SLA, you have your native language, the L1. That is your only source of transfer.
It's the only other system that can influence the new one.
Right, but in third language acquisition, you have the L1 and the L2.
You have 2 potential sources of influence.
And that L2 isn't just a passive skill you picked up. It becomes an active filter.
What do you mean by filter?
Think about a native English speaker learning French. That's hard. But take a native English speaker who already knows Spanish and then tries to learn French.
The Spanish helps because it's also a Romance language.
It helps, but it acts as a very specific bridge. The brain now has a whole database of Romance language structures it can draw from genders, conjugations, sentence flows. The L2 can actually block the L1's influence.
So it tells the brain, hey, ignore the English way of doing things. The Spanish way fits better here.
Exactly. The interactions become multi-directional. The blueprint just has more materials to work with.
Okay, so that's the blueprint theory.
Yeah.
But we said this was a heavyweight fight. So who's in the blue corner?
The usage-based approach. And these guys, they reject the blueprint entirely.
No special biological faculty.
None. They argue language is just a tool, like any other cognitive skill. We learn it through exemplars and frequency.
So no cheat sheet.
No cheat sheet, just pattern recognition. We learn by categorizing things based on how often we see them. The source material used this really specific analogy about rice and apples that explains this perfectly.
I found this fascinating. It's about how strong your mental categories are.
Yes, if you live in Southeast Asia, you probably see rice every single day. It's breakfast, lunch, dinner. Your cognitive category for rice is incredibly detailed and strong.
But if you live in, say, Scandinavia, you know what rice is, but the category is much weaker.
Exactly. You don't rely on it. And usage-based theory says language works the same way. If you hear a pattern like subject or verb object over and over,
It becomes entrenched. It becomes the rice you eat every day.
it becomes a groove worn into a road. And the deeper that groove gets, the harder it is to steer out of it.
And this leads to the competition model.
Right. In any sentence you hear, there are these cues that tell you who is doing what to whom. Is it the word order? Is it the ending on the verb? These cues compete for your attention.
And learning a new language means figuring out which cues win in that system.
Yes, and there was a study mentioned Sands and colleagues in 2015 that really illustrates this struggle.
This is the one about learning Latin, right?
It's a classic example of L3 processing. They took native English speakers, L1 English, who were learning Latin as a third language, but the twist was their second language.
Some knew Japanese as an L2, others knew Spanish.
Right. And English and Latin work very, very differently. English relies on word order. The dog bites the man. We know the dog is the biter because it comes first.
Swap them. The man bites the dog, and the meaning flips.
Completely. But Latin relies on case marking. The endings on the words tell you who's doing the biting, no matter where they are in the sentence.
So you could scramble the words, and the meaning would stay the same.
Exactly. So what happened to the learners?
Let me guess. They fell back on English.
Initially, yes. When they started Latin, they just looked for word order. They completely ignored the case endings because their English brains were so entrenched in that idea that word order is king.
The groove was too deep.
But, and this is the key, over 4 weeks of intensive training, they started to shift. They began noticing the Latin cues. The study showed the brain physically struggling to reconfigure those old L1 habits to fit the new L3 system.
It really highlights that the brain isn't a blank slate for a new language. It's a crowded room.
A very crowded room. And that brings us perfectly to our second lens, the dynamic lens. Because once you have all these languages in the room, how do they actually get along?
I think the common assumption is that a multilingual person is just two monolinguals stitched together. You know, I have my English brain and my Spanish brain, and they don't touch.
Diffie Cook calls that the comparative fallacy. And it's a huge problem in research. It is just scientifically flawed to compare a language learner to a native monolingual.
Because their mental systems are fundamentally different.
Fundamentally different. A multilingual isn't two monolinguals in one body. They are a unique speaker with a unique integrated system. It's a unitary language system.
Okay, and this system is incredibly sensitive.
It really is. It operates on a use it or lose it basis, which means we have to talk about attrition.
Decay.
Yes. Language isn't static. We think once we learn something, it's locked in, like saving a file. But even your native language, your L1 can suffer attrition.
So if you move abroad and only speak your L3 for 20 years,
Your L1 doesn't disappear, but the access pathways get rusty. You might find yourself accidentally using L3 grammar when you speak your native tongue.
this connects to something that I think is often misunderstood. Heritage speakers.
Yeah.
You know, someone who grew up hearing a language at home, but maybe stopped speaking it when they went to school,
And people will often say their acquisition was incomplete.
which many researchers really push back against.
They do, because it's not incomplete acquisition, it's a difference in input. Often, heritage speakers are learning from parents who are themselves immigrants. The parents' own grammar might have undergone some attrition.
So the input the child gets is already different from the standard version back in the home country.
Exactly. So the heritage speaker isn't learning a broken version. They are successfully acquiring the specific variety they are exposed to. It's just a different target.
That shifts the perspective completely. It's not failure, it's adaptation.
And to model all this, the growth, the decay, the interaction, researchers use something called dynamic systems theory, or DST.
The source uses the weather analogy, the butterfly effect.
Exactly. You can't just add variables. X plus Y does not equal Z. It's nonlinear. If you change one variable, like adding a third language, it changes the relationship between all the other variables.
It changes how you process your L1. It changes your emotional connection to your L2.
All of it. But this chaos actually leads to a benefit, doesn't it?
The M factor.
The multilingualism factor. This is the cognitive edge, because the multilingual brain is constantly managing these competing systems, constantly suppressing the English word for apple, to say the French one. It develops enhanced monitoring skills.
You're working out the brain's executive control center.
You get better error detection. You get better metalinguistic awareness, which is the ability to think about language as a system. That's the M factor, the silver lining to all the cognitive chaos.
Okay, so we've looked at the neurons, the dynamic system. Now I want to zoom out to our third lens, because we don't just learn languages in a vacuum. We learn them in society. And society has some pretty weird ideas about what a language actually is.
It really does. And often the distinction between a language and a dialect is purely political. It's not linguistic at all.
The source gave the example of Norwegian and Swedish.
A classic case. You put a Norwegian and a Swede in a room, they can generally understand each other. Linguistically, they're very close.
But socially, two separate languages, two flags, two armies.
Right. And then you have the reverse situation.
Mandarin and Cantonese.
Which are mutually unintelligible. A Mandarin speaker can't understand a Cantonese speaker without studying, yet politically, they're often grouped as dialects of Chinese.
So the very definition of what we're acquiring is fluid. It depends where you're standing. There was a story in the text about a woman named Ana Lucia that really drove this home for me.
Yes, Ana Lucia. So she was European Portuguese, born in Portugal. She moves to Brazil at age 40. Now, socially, you might look at that and say, she speaks Portuguese. She moved to a Portuguese-speaking country. She's not multilingual.
But her brain tells a completely different story.
Cognitively, her brain is managing two distinct grammars. European Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese have different syntax, different pronunciation, different words. Her brain has to actively inhibit the European grammar to function in Brazil.
So is she multilingual? Cognitively, absolutely.
Then socially, she falls right through the cracks.
That's such a crucial distinction. It shows how our labels, bilingual, monolingual, can hide the cognitive reality.
Yeah.
And this plays into status, too. Not all languages are created equal.
No, this is the concept of diglossia. You have high or H functions and low or L functions. You might use one language for school and government and another for home and with friends, and this is heavily tied to socioeconomic status, SES.
And the text mentions something really concerning about how this affects kids in school.
It's deeply concerning. Standardized tests will often misdiagnose low SES children as having language disorders.
Why?
Simply because they speak a different variety or dialect at home, a low variety than the high standard variety that's used in the test.
So the child is cognitively fine, but the test is just biased against their language.
Exactly. It's not a cognitive deficit. It's a mismatch of status and variety. And that leads us directly into how schools handle this. The source talks about Senos's continua.
We need to stop thinking in rigid boxes, like elite bilingualism versus folk bilingualism.
And instead look at a sliding scale. There was a case study on this that was surprisingly complex, the Basque Country.
Right, this is a region in Spain and France with unique language, Basque or Euskara.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a language isolate. Right, it's not related to Spanish or French at all.
Not at all. It's very old, very distinct. And they've been trying to bring it back through education. They have these different models. Model A is Spanish dominant, Model B is mixed, and Model D is Basque dominant.
And the shift has been dramatic.
Huge. In the mid-'80s, Model A, the Spanish one, was the norm, something like 65% of students. Today, it's under 10%. Model D is the new standard. It's a massive success for language revitalization.
Over 600,000 speakers now.
Mm-hmm.
But, and here's the nuance that really stuck with me. Even though the schools are teaching in Basque, the text says Spanish is still the dominant language in social networks.
That's the paradox. You can control the classroom, but you can't control the playground.
The kids switch to Spanish the second the bell rings.
They do. The research shows the social gravity just pulls them towards the majority language. You can teach competence, but you can't force usage.
You can't legislate what language feels cool to a teenager.
Precisely. And there was one last comparison the source made that I think is vital. Canadian immersion programs.
We usually think of these as the gold standard English speakers learning French.
It's often called elite bilingualism. Parents choose it to give their kids an advantage. It's an additive process. I speak English, and I'm adding French.
But now compare that to Indigenous students in Canada, say, speakers of Cree or Ojibwe.
For them, the system is totally different. For an Indigenous student, Standard English is effectively a third language. They might speak an Indigenous language at home or a non-standard variety of English. But the school system just treats them as if they are native speakers of Standard English.
So while the English kid learning French is praised for being bilingual, the Indigenous kid learning Standard English is often framed as struggling.
Exactly. It's an add-on for one group and a requirement for survival for the other. For that Indigenous student, Standard English functions as an L3, that they have to learn to access the curriculum, but without any of the support that the elite immersion students get.
That is a heavy realization. It really shows you can't talk about language learning without talking about power.
It connects everything. The cognitive burden, the social status, the educational policy, it all intersects right there.
So let's synthesize all of this. We started at the microscopic level, neurons firing, merge operations, syntax, and we ended up with the macroscopic societal status, school models, political definitions.
And the thread connecting all of it is interaction. Whether it's neurons or nations, languages are not static objects. They are dynamic forces pushing and pulling against each other.
So being well informed on this isn't just knowing that L3 is different from L2. It's understanding that adding a language changes the entire system.
It fundamentally alters the architecture of the mind.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. The source suggests that monolingualism is a reductionist view. Even if you only speak English, you have registers, dialects, slang. And if you're multilingual, your languages are always interacting, decaying, growing. So do we ever really speak just one language? Or are we all just navigating one giant, complex, shifting cognitive system?
That is the question. And I suspect the answer lies in that messy, beautiful M factor.
Observe your own language use today. See if you can spot the M factor in action. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.
Until next time.